This is apropos, as Iran's supreme leader resurfaced earlier to warn against future US attacks, making his first public comments since a ceasefire was declared with Israel. The regime is intensifying a crackdown on internal dissent. Rights groups say scores of people have been arrested over accusations of collaboration with Israel, with authorities calling for expedited trials and executions. Solange Moujan has the details.
It is a means of creating widespread fear across Iran, among dissidents of the regime, but also everyday citizens. Abduction, arrest, torture, forced confession, followed by a swift trial and execution. According to Iranian state media, 3 men, Idris Ali, Azad Shodeh, and Rasul Ahmad, were hanged on Wednesday. All 3 were charged with spying for Israel. According to the Norway-based NGO Iran Human Rights, or IHR, 2 of the men were border porters. The group says they were arrested for smuggling alcohol and then forced to confess to espionage for Israel. Wednesday's hangings are tragically far from an anomaly. According to IHR, nearly 600 people have been executed this year in Iran, more than any other nation in the world behind China. Watchdogs say such executions cover up intelligence failures and instill fear. The Iranian news agency for the regime's Revolutionary Guard said on social media that they'd arrested more than 700 people in the past 12 days, who they claim were working for what they call the Zionist regime, or Israel. For Shirin Ardikhani, a human rights lawyer, for the Nobel Peace Prize winner Narges Mohammadi, and the French professor Cécile Colère, both of whom, along with Colère's partner Jacques Paris, are being held in Iran. She told France 24 that hostages and dissidents are particularly vulnerable right now.
The authorities are going to seek revenge on us, so this rhetoric of an internal enemy will come. It will be used as justification for hunting down dissidents. That's what happened with these executions. Unfortunately, the hangings are going to start again. A dog that's vulnerable is one that barks and bites.
Amnesty International has issued a dire warning about arbitrary executions and torture, with grave concern over those already on death row, including Ahmed Reza Jalali. The Swedish Iranian has been on death row for 7.5 years now, for, according to Iran, spying for Israel. Amnesty fears he is at an imminent risk of execution.
Well, for more, we are joined now by Hussein Baoumi, Deputy Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa at Amnesty International. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme, Hussein. You have said that Iranian authorities, they're essentially weaponising the death penalty to assert control over and also instill fear in the Iranian population. What exactly have you documented over the past few weeks?
Thanks for having me, and good evening. So what we have been seeing since the 13th of June in particular is an intensification of the Iranian authorities' crackdowns that has been happening for the past years and even decades. So in this period alone, we saw that the authorities have arrested hundreds of people, presumably or according to them, over accusations of espionage or collaboration with the enemy, that is Israel. We have also seen that the authorities have executed at least 6 men on the basis of completely fabricated charges and completely unfair trials. To stress on those 2 points, people who have been arrested, we are talking about, according to statements by Iranian officials, this could be really anyone who posted a social media post that the government deems as critical of the nation's morale or critical of the regime or supporting Israel in any way. We are talking about even people that might have been completely arrested on an arbitrary or random manner, and then the authorities, in an attempt to send a message that it's strong and cracking down on quote-unquote spies, is then subjected to torture and forced to confess to unfounded charge of espionage. And then for people that were convicted, I'm talking about trials that last for 10 minutes in front of revolutionary courts, where people, they rely on confessions taken under torture that are then used to execute people in a really shocking manner. This pattern is extremely concerning, given Iran's long history of the use of executions and death penalty and torture and forced disappearance to install fear and control the wider population.
And Hussein, people are understandably often afraid to talk about what's actually happening on the ground in Iran, even some journalists who work there. So is it possible to even know just how widespread this crackdown is? How many people have been arrested? How many people have been executed?
So the numbers that I'm giving are the absolute minimum. And we're really relying on this stage of the larger number of people is really coming from the Iranian authorities themselves. So this is the absolute minimum number of people. For all we know, the number could be much higher. And also, it's important to note that these crackdowns, they tend to target particular groups at a much higher rate. For example, dissidents, critics of the government, people from ethnic minorities or religious minorities across the country. We also know that the authorities sometimes they would arrest people and subject them to enforced disappearance, where no one knows where they go or where they are held and completely cut off from any contact with the outside world. So really, this is a small subset of the wider crackdown. Let's not also forget that in the immediate aftermath of the attack by Israel, the Iranian authorities, they shut down the internet across most of the country. They restricted access to communication tools, including WhatsApp and other tools. And so access to information has become extremely much more limited even than before. You can only imagine the anguish and the fears that Iranians across the country are now suffering, whether because they don't know what was happening, how the war will end, when it will end, but also added to that is the role of the Iranian authorities in preventing them from communicating with each other or knowing what's happening.
And Hussein, human rights groups like Amnesty say that, Iranian authorities must ensure that people are protected from enforced disappearance, from torture, from unfair trials. But how exactly can that be ensured? What kind of pressure can be placed on the Iranian regime?
The important thing to remember about human rights violations and crimes under international law across Iran is that there is an absolute sense of impunity, which the Iranian authorities from the very top to the very bottom feel. Iranian officials feel that they can do what they want with absolutely zero accountability. And so the key to challenging this, the key to start reversing this trend is to challenge this sense of impunity. How can this be done? Several ways. The ones that I want to focus on is that a lot of countries around the world, what they can do is that they can start investigations against Iranian officials. And again, I'm talking about officials from the very top to the very bottom. So structural investigations under the principle of universal jurisdiction, that is, that courts in several countries have the power to investigate crimes under international law in other countries. And these trials, even if they do not lead immediately to arrests or even if they do not immediately lead to justice, what they would do is that they would send a message across the Iranian authorities that people will be held accountable, that even if they escape justice today, tomorrow, in a year, in 2, in 3, in 4, in 5, they might and they will be held accountable. This is something that is very important. And it's also important to send a message to the millions of Iranians who are under the heavy hand of the authorities in Iran, that they are not alone, that people around the world and governments around the world are thinking about them and are willing to help them in peaceful ways.
And is there evidence, though, that that kind of pressure is actually being applied on Iran? As you say, it's executed more people just in the space of last year in Iran than the rest of the world combined.
So what we have seen so far, in particular following the recent protest for women life freedom, and is that we have seen a number of very good statements from a number of world leaders from across from a large number of people around the world. If you remember, there were times where there were massive protests across Europe, across the US, across the world in solidarity with Iranians. We have also seen some measures like, for example, sanctions, travel and financial sanctions against Iranian officials. We have also started to see, for example, countries taking Iran, for example, France taking Iran in front of the International Court of Justice in relation to the practice of hostage taking. But where we have not seen yet movement is in relation to universal jurisdiction or trials against specific individuals, specific government officials, specific security officials for their role in crimes under international law. And so it's very important to see that there are some examples where we have seen globally. For example, we have seen that several Syrian officials have been prosecuted back when Assad regime was in power. And this did lead to some impact. It did not obviously lead to a huge impact, but it was part of building blocks towards having impact and changing the direction and the behavior of the governments. Even if it saves the lives of one man, one woman, one person alone, that's in itself massive impact. But we need to see that. We need to see world leaders and governments moving beyond words to something effective. That thing is universal jurisdiction and trials under their own national jurisdictions.
And Hussein, we've heard a lot of talk in recent days about potential regime change in Iran. Is there any evidence, despite the crackdown, that people are actually involved, in a popular uprising, or are people just simply too afraid, or has in fact support for authorities increased since the Israeli offensive began?
What I can say on this topic is that the Iranian authorities are very much concerned about seeming that they are losing control over the country. And as a result, they have went to great lengths to install fear and control the population. Again, this includes practices like restricting access to the internet, like executions, like massive arrests, but also threats. What we have seen was lots of threats by several Iranian officials against the population, threatening them of expedited trials, threatening them of executions, threatening them of being punished for challenging the regime. So what we are really seeing, we are seeing a government that's really trying to project strengths, it's trying to project control, and it's doing so through escalating its widespread and systematic abuses against under international law. So this is what we are seeing right now. And what we can know from history is that these tactics never succeed in the end. What we can know is that you cannot force the population at the end of the day to like you. You cannot really change the fundamentals which has led the population and the millions of Iranians to go and protest against the government, to silence them or to scare them, even if what you see is control or success of these tactics for a short period. We know from Iranian history, but also the history of all oppressed people across the world, that these tactics are only successful for very short periods.
Hussein, thanks so much for being with us on the programme tonight. That is Hussein Baoumi, Deputy Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa at Amnesty International.